Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second in our People series of seminars. I'm delighted to join all of you this afternoon for this seminar run in conjunction with Tourism Northern Ireland. And I am pleased to be joined by Tim Brown. Tim gave a seminar last week, and this is the second. The first one is available via the YouTube channel, and you can go in and watch it any time. And this one will also be recorded so that you can review it whenever you want to. Today, Tim will talk about re-engaging your stakeholders, and I hope you'll enjoy it and find it useful in a week when we are about to see considerable unlocking of the economy and the ability to serve people outdoors. So enjoy this afternoon, and I'll see you for questions at the end.
Thank you, Janice, and what a wonderful morning it is, or even the afternoon. 2 days countdown, I understand, it is for you guys to reopen at least outdoors. We've had it for a few weeks now, and yeah, we've been busy over here, so I'm hoping the weather's going to be good for the weekend, and you're going to be busy there. So this session is about re-engaging your stakeholders. As Janice said, if you want to learn more about re-engaging or re-identifying yourself, go back and listen to the old one. But this one's about your stakeholders. And whilst this is majority really around your people, any of the stories or tools are equally as important to your customers as well. For those who don't know me, my name's Tim Brown. My patchwork background is I've never had a job longer than 6 months up until what I do now. I've worked in recruitment, sales, retail, parks, leisure, hotels, restaurants, bars, and about 20 years ago, I wanted to find out more about the difference between success and failure, which for me was down to relationships you have with yourself, the people around you, your team, as well as your customers, suppliers. And so this session is, I guess, a bit more close to my heart in regards to the idea of how can we make sure that our stakeholders, the relationships we have, are maximized. So what I'd like to do is to crack on, I guess, and to talk about the three things that I'm going to cover today, which is, first of all, reassurance. As if you remember from the last session, it was all about reopening, our road to recovery. So re-engage with your stakeholders covers reassurance. What are you doing to ensure that your stakeholders feel safe? Recognize, what are you doing to acknowledge the last year and where they've been, and finding relationships, what are you doing to understand those around you? I was listening to a podcast that was recorded at the end of the last lockdown, and it was Louis Theroux, the journalist, and somebody said, are you venturing out much yet? And he said, you get to a certain age where after you've been sitting down cross-legged, you know that when you stand up, it's just going to hurt a little bit. And he said, I'm just not sure I want to stand up yet. So I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty for some people, and there's going to be a lot of desperation for others. And I'm going to cover as much as I can in that today in regards to how we can manage that both from our staff and the customer's point of view. So let's crack on and talk about are we reassuring our stakeholders? And I think the thing I want to talk about here is what state will they be in, and why is that important? As I said regarding Louis Theroux, he's uncertain, which is a state. There'll be certain people who are desperate. And I suppose what I want to do is cover about why is state so important. And for that, let's do a 5 minutes worth of psychology. So this is how information comes in and out of our brain. I start with the event, and according to Chet Mahaley, in his book called Flow, he postulates there are 2 million bytes of information coming into our brain in only 1 second. Of those 2 million, you can only process 147 of them, which is a big shortfall. If you feel like that's not true, then I wonder how many of you are thinking of the feeling of your right foot before I mention the feeling of your right foot. I'm guessing if you're not wearing a shoe on your right foot, maybe the sock on your right foot. But before I mention it, I'm guessing you weren't thinking about it that much. But now I've mentioned it, it's obviously in your mind. So there's stuff out there we have to filter, and we filter that through deletion. We delete stuff that's not important. We distort things by hearing what we want to hear, and we generalize things to be all the same. And those filters, I guess an example would be, I'm guessing most of you know somebody that always annoys you, which is of course a generalization. And if they did anything good, the chances are you wouldn't recognize it, which is a deletion. And if they said something nice to you, you might possibly suppose they're being sarcastic, which is of course a distortion. It's not them doing it, it's how you then filter them that then carries it forward. And that information comes into our brain through our five senses, through what we hear, what we see, what we feel, what we taste, and what we touch. And we're left with what's called an internal representation, a version inside our head of something that's outside of it. That's relevant because, well, that affects our mood, our state, our emotion. And the other thing that affects our mood, our state, or emotion is our physiology, the way we have our body. And why is any of this important? Well, because the state you're in determines what comes out, which is the behavior. So all behavior is state dependent. Now, I know that might seem like an obvious thing, and let's just break it down to a customer journey. The behavior you would like someone to exhibit on leaving your hotel or your restaurant might be a warm handshake, well, not at the moment, clearly, but a warm smile, which is a behavior, a thank you, a tip, maybe advocacy by telling a friend, maybe review by putting on TripAdvisor, and maybe a phone call to rebook for another visit. These are all the behaviors you would like someone to exhibit on leaving your property. Let's take a step back. In order to do that, what step must they be in? Those steps, that state might be impressed, relieved, engaged, full, nourished, inebriated. It could be that they are committed to your brand, or they are just happy to be out. Those are the states that need to carry those behaviors. But when they turn up, where could they be? They could be lost, they could be confused, they could be wary. And it's our job to read where they're at and to take them on a journey to get them to be committed and engaged. And thank you very much indeed, here's a tip. So I'll show you this diagram in regards to the idea of how can we make sure that we're answering all these questions and making sure that we're aiming to get the right behavior because we want to get the right state. So let's go through and think about where perhaps either our staff or even our guests might be at the moment. So the current state, it could be lost. In life, some people have had a huge breakdown, meltdown, and they just like, what is going on in the world? They're just generally feeling lost. There could be uncertainty of what the future holds, uncertainty of what the industry is going to look like, uncertainty of their jobs. So, you know, I'm covering both tracks here regarding customers as well as staff. But that uncertainty will be mimicked in those behaviours of lack of confidence. There'll be a certain amount of hesitancy, lack of proactivity. There'll be anxiety, which is different to the uncertainty, the anxiety about what they're going to do and how they're going to feel. And of course, at the bottom of this, I did put they are excited, because there's every possibility they are going to be desperate to be out and excited and just wanting to be there. I think in the last session, we talked about the fact that when we talk about the identity, the being in a recovery business, you are definitely helping people to recover from where they're at so they can feel more comfortable in the future of where we're going and how we're going to feel. So excited is definitely one of those states that people will be coming out in. They will want to get drunk, they're going to want to hug and kiss and all the other things that they're used to doing, and they just can't wait because they think that suddenly once a bar's open, they can go and do that. And I thought therefore about what would be the desired state in each of these areas. So they're not want to be the opposite, but from lost, they want to be found. They want to, if we talk about your team, they will want to know that they are belong again, that they are back to where they were. They want to know things are normal, whatever that looks like, and they can be more content within who they are and what's going on. And I think that's a really important place for them to feel that they're going to be. Uncertainty, that's going to want to be confident. They're going to want to be confident that they are safe, that they are in an environment that is contained, and how things are going to work. From an anxiety point of view, they're going to want to feel safe, that they're not going to get COVID, that they are being looked after properly, that things are relatively normal. And interestingly, from an excited point of view, speaking to clients who have had people turn up and just almost try and wreck the place, they need to be contained. And of course, this is mainly about managing on the mismanagement of expectations. So that's so as far as I feel is that We need to fill the gap between lost and found, uncertain and confident, anxious and safe, excited and contained. And it's your job to think of how we can do that in our operations, in our recruitment, in our induction, in our reopening, that allows our people, our stakeholders, whichever they may be, to feel the desired state. So if we just think of lost and found for your team, that's going to be, what team building have you done to make sure that they feel that they are back to work and things are back as normal, for them to feel that they belong again and they feel that they have been found. You will obviously be doing a whole bunch of training regarding COVID, but that's not just the only bit of training you need to do. It's going to have to be around some team element as well. Uncertainty to confident. You will obviously be overwhelming them with the new regs and the new procedures that you will be delivering. But that's also what's going on around the site in order for them to feel that they can feel confident that you've taken every great measure as well. Anxious to safe, and some of that will be around a similar kind of place, from the uncertain to confident, just to let them know how things are going to be and how you see the future rolling out. You may not know, but it will be your position as an owner and a manager to make sure that the guidelines are there and the systems are in place for them to feel that everything is being done in accordance to what needs to be done, but more importantly, communicate it. Because just because you're doing it doesn't mean that people know you're doing it. I think I mentioned last time about one of my clients who's going around with his fogging machine, even if it makes no impact at all, just to make an impact, just so it looks like you're doing something. And excited contained, well, that's going to be everything from information you're putting on your website to when you when guests are making a booking, to when they turn up and the host greets them, to when they're seated. All of those key moments are how and when you're going to be making sure that they're being reminded what's going on. Some of it's going to be very visual regarding masks or screens, but some of that's going to have to be quite verbal, just from an information point of view. So you can inform them on a regular basis. And it can be done quite easily without telling. The simple strategy of, you're probably aware that, I don't know if you know that, that kind of introductory phrase that allows you to communicate to a guest to then let them know what is going on. And I think it's really important, therefore, to think about that gap between the current state and desired state and what your role is. And if we go back to the psychology of it, let's just break that down and how we do that. So, as I said, the information comes in, we then filter that information, and of course, so your guests are going to forget stuff, which is what they're going to delete. So we need to remind them constantly, as our staff will. They will forget to do things because things are different. They might just immediately go back to how things were before. So we need to remind them, and that behavior that they are delivering will in turn highlight and remind the guest what's going on, so that they can in turn make sure that we're meeting guidelines, as well as obviously making money. They will want to hear what they want to hear, which is why they'll distort information. So that's about making sure that you get clarity and clarify from them and to them to make sure they've heard what you said. And I think one of the important things is, there's so many ways of interpreting some of these regulations that it's quite scary. And I think the worst one in some ways is generalizing. Well, my kids can share desks at school, why can't we share tables in the outdoor seating area? That's just not a thing at the moment in that different context, but they're going to generalize it's okay to do it here, so we can do it there. And that's around you making sure that it's communicated in such a way. I mentioned when I had my hair cut, and Paul, the owner, was confronted by a young girl who chose to decide to not wear a mask because she was having a bad day. And he just said, look, you can not wear a mask, but you can also not have your hair cut. And I've got hundreds of people trying to come in here every day, and I've got staff who have got mortgages to pay, and I can't afford, just because of you having a bad day, to not actually wear the mask. So you can either have your hair cut with a mask, I've got one here, or you can just please leave until you're ready to come back. And it's sometimes having to have honest conversations with, that might be with staff or with guests, to actually say, we're doing more than just trying to get money out of you. We're trying to recover the economy and people's lives at the same time. So how do we do any of this? Well, as I said, the physiology part is quite straightforward. You can control someone's, or you can encourage someone to change their state through the environment in which you create for them, their physiology. So that's going to be what we put inside them, the environment in which they're in. So making that look and appear safe, that might be with signage, that might be with, I think I mentioned, the idea of having salt, pepper, and hand sanitizer on the table. Who knew that would ever be a thing? So there'll be little key aspects are going on constantly to remind your guests and your staff what's happening. And of course, the internal representation is how we speak and communicate to them, and that will in turn change the state. So think about the language and the standards, operating procedures, and how we set our processes enable for us to be able to develop the business in order to grow it. I always tell us, my favorite story about this model is I got two young boys, or two boys, they're getting older now, but when they were younger, it was Father's Day, and my boys asked me to go back to bed so they could pretend to wake me up. They said, can you go back to bed and pretend to be asleep, and we can pretend to wake you up? You got to love kids. So there I was lying in bed, and they came in and they woke me up, or I pretended to be asleep and they pretended to wake up, and I'm awake. What have you got me? And they got me a card each. And my youngest boy, Jacob, would have been 6 at the time. He wrote me a poem. It was a poem to die for. It brought a tear to my eye, and we held each other and we told each other we loved each other. And then we have a discussion about who loves each other more. I'm bigger than him, so I've got more love to give, or does he have to give more love to me? You can probably imagine the conversations that I'll have. And then my eldest son climbed to bed and he gave me a card with 4 pictures on it. Things I do with my dad. Picture number 1, I play rugby with my dad. Picture number 2, I go sailing with my dad. Picture number 3, I play computer games with my dad. And picture number 4, I cuddle my dad. Now, I never really considered my eldest son, Sam, who would have been 8 at the time, as a touchy-feely kid. And for him to feel that one of the 4 things that he associated with me was cuddling was huge. And I had this wave of love, joy, and pride flow over me, and a tear formed in my eye. And Sam saw that tear, and as he saw that tear, he slowly put his hand into a fist and he punched the air and he said, yes, he said, I knew I could make you cry. Clearly I wanted to slap him for being cheeky, but I was overwhelmed with his intention. And I said to him, if you could wake up with that much intention every single day of your life, how amazing would that be? Now, I'm going to be honest, he was familiar with this model. It's what I do, and I must have shared it with him at some point. So let's just break it down to what he did. The end behavior he wanted me to exhibit was a tear in my eye. And what state would drive that? Well, he could have gone for pain and need me in the crutch, but he didn't. He went for love, joy, and pride. And how did he create that? Well, where did he tell me to go? He told me to go back to bed. So in the physiology of comfort and relaxation. And then for the internal representation, he drew me 4 pictures in case I'd forget. So how do you control someone's state? Through the internal representation and through the physiology. And he was 8. And for us, about to open up a property, a restaurant, bar, hotel, it should be that simple. Think about the end behavior you want to get, and think about the state in which the people and the customers and the staff are going to be, and then drive them forward to where we want them to get them to be. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty, there's going to be a lot of anxiety, there's going to be a lot of people feel lost, and there'll be a lot of people excited. And I think it's our job to recognize that right at the beginning, and then move them forward through how we communicate that to enable them to feel that they belong and they know where they're going. And I think that really links nicely into where we go next, which is all around how we recognize the year they've had, or maybe the year they haven't had. I start with a quote on there. I was listening to an article on the radio, and they were talking about how podcasts, how the step makers had their day, and the woman on the radio was talking about something called the quantifiable workplace. And I'm going to talk about scoreboarding in the last session, but very briefly, teams that have trackers are outperforming teams that don't. And that's because the quantifiable workplace means as soon as you start measuring stuff, people start measuring stuff. And so it was a whole idea of how can we measure how well we're doing. And part of that was if we measure things, people are happier. And then it went on to the cheesy line that's on there, which is well-being equals well-billing. So if you want your team to actually sell more, make sure they're happy. And at the moment, how happy are they? Well, I said, we don't know where they're going to be. Some of you have interacted already. I'm hoping you have before Friday at least. But here are a couple of ideas, that have worked so far. And I think that will work this time because it's no different. And that's first of all, having smaller team sizes. Now, part of that's about bubbles, but actually it keeps the communications shorter and smaller. You're buddying people. It means that you're going to be less reliant on one person running one section. They're going to feel much closer and therefore going to feel safer about not letting people down because they're going to have an uncertainty over their competence levels, and that's going to be absolutely certain. Some of them haven't been working for a year, so can I still do what I wanted to do? I don't know. So how can we make sure that we're delivering that? Create a safe space to communicate. Several teams I've been working with over here regarding getting started up. We've been doing some lovely work around, before we even went back to standards and techniques, we just sat there and went like, what's gone on this year? And celebrated some of the things that have happened. And we talked about some of the things that haven't. Some people have had loss, some people have gains in life. And it's around how we feel about those things and how we communicate it. And by doing so, allow us to share everybody's journey. There's a huge amount of FOMO was existing, fear of missing out last year, and I think that's a really careful bit to be aware of with that, because some people would have climbed the equivalent of Everest by going up the stairs, or they'd have baked for the homeless, or whatever it might have been, and some people might have just been homeschooling. And I want to say just homeschooling, that might be how they feel, but they've been like ruling the world by doing that, because that's not been easy for anybody. So making sure that you have a space for them to communicate. My next point on there is listen, and that as a manager, you are being so focused on your business, and now's the time to focus on your people so that they can focus on your business. You need to listen to them and what they're saying, and even what they're not saying, because they will not be saying a lot of stuff that you'll notice in them. So, your guests and your staff will be not necessarily carrying out their normal behaviors. They will be communicating in such a way that is not their normal style. In the same way that any of you got kids, or maybe even you get hangry. Our attitudes and our behaviors will change depending on our state, and therefore we need to make sure if we listen to what state they're in, we're more likely to drive it forward. And I think this time more than any other, I don't know what first aid training you've been doing, but mental first aiders are now high up on an agenda, and I think now's a great time to try and install those champions to make them aware. Doesn't mean you don't need to. It just means that you have experts in the team that can enable people to listen. And I think that recognition of where they've been is a really important dialogue to have with your people. And it's no different to your guests. Some people won't want to talk, some people will. You need to think about staffing levels and regarding, how many staff do I need? Because will dialogues be greater now or less? Will people be wanting to talk more or less? And if they're in their group of 6, will they just want to be left alone? And I think it's also about how we therefore communicate with them to drive that forward. But most of all, listen to them. And that relationship we have is so crucial. So what I thought I'd do is I'd share with you a tool I use with companies and teams. We're obviously not going to complete it, but I want to highlight it to you because to me it's a really interesting element of what one might call emotional intelligence or relationship intelligence. For you to stop and think about the people you work with, your customers, how you interact with them, and the fact that we generally think that everybody else is the same as us, and therefore we communicate and speak to them the same way, when in reality they're not, and they're going to do things differently. And they've had an experience of lockdown that's going to be very different to your own because of your personality. So whatever communication tool or profiling tool you may have used, The one I use is called Core Strengths. You fill out a questionnaire. It plots itself somewhere on a triangle like this, where there are three main key motivators. You have your reds, who are your performance driven. You have your blues, who are your people driven, and you have your greens, who are process driven. Red people are doing things for themselves. Blue people are doing things for others. Green people are doing things by themselves, and the people in the middle, the hubs, the core, they're going to be doing things with others. And obviously, each one of these motivations will be experiencing life very different at the moment. I sat down in probably week 2 or 3 of the first lockdown last year, and I got the family to complete this. I did so in order to help them understand how they are coping and how they're managing it. I also did it so that they could understand and respect perhaps how we as a family are coping with it, which would be very different to each other. So your reds are, as I said, performance driven. How would you ever recognize them? Well, if it's an email, it's going to be short, direct, and to the point. It wouldn't say Dear Tim because Tim's in the address bar. It might say kind regards, but that's because they put it in a signature. The blue email is going to be much more paragraph led. It's going to be how are you, full of niceties, maybe longer. And for the red people, they'll be trying to fish out the relevant information. And for the blue people, it's very polite and as I say, full of niceties to involve people. The green email will clearly be in numerical or alphabetical order, with chronological order, with spreadsheets attached. How should we reply to each of these? Well, in the same way you've received them, you should send them back. So the red one should be direct and to the point. The blue one should be fuller, and the green one, they really like it when you just answer to each of the points as we go through. How would you notice them at a meeting? So it's whether you've got a Zoom meeting, it's a 10 o'clock meeting. What time's the red person going to turn up? They're going to turn up, well, possibly late. They will possibly take over, even if it's not their meeting, and they'll be dominant within it. The blue person, they'll turn up early to make sure that they're there on time. Obviously, they can't bring tea, cakes, and cookies to a Zoom meeting, but they will make sure that everyone's okay and everyone knows what's going on. And the green person will turn up at 10 o'clock because that's what time the 10 o'clock meeting would be. Because the green person will bring their notes and will be prepared, unlike the red person who'll be fishing around for a pen whenever they need one. Green people are your silent Einsteins. They won't say anything until they need to. And of course, we then start to look at how each of the different colors will assess each of the different colors. So a red person might perceive the green person as being distant or not engaged or not wanting to commit, but actually all they're doing is sitting there and reflecting. The blue person may not want to contribute much because they're being overwhelmed with the red person. So you can start to see these dynamics interacting and where we get it right and wrong. If we think about lockdown, well, red people have been struggling because they want to get stuff done. And they're possibly the ones that have been going out and finding other things to do. They've either been doing that or they've been struggling hugely because the gap for them between what they're normally doing and what they're doing now is huge. And that might have its own mental health barriers because of that. The blue people are missing out because they want to be with people. They want to be sharing. They'll be reaching out, and they'll possibly be feeling very lonely. So they will be wanting to get back and engaged and feel like they belong again. The green people, on the whole, they were quite. I want to say they're quite happy in lockdown. I did see a lovely meme once at the beginning saying, if you're an introvert, phone up an extrovert because they're really struggling at the moment. And I think that's a great reference point in regards to the fact that we haven't all been dealing with this the same way. It has been different for everybody. Now, from a business point of view, you're going to have your red guests who are going to think that they are bigger than the guidelines. You can if you go to a table, you can tell a red guest because they're the ones that will look up and then look back down again. What are you doing interfering in our table? You'll get the blue guests who will be apologizing to the red person by looking at you going, I'm really sorry about them. And they'll be nice to you and involve you perhaps in the conversation. And maybe the green people wouldn't even notice you're there. So it's how we interact with these different people all the time And of course, some of that's going to be how we give information to them. So if I'm giving a role to a red person, I'm going to make sure it's important, or maybe make it into a challenge. Last week, Jack did it in half an hour. Do you think you can beat that time? Only you can do it. Maybe the blue person would be, oh, I'm really in trouble. Can you give me a hand with this? Someone's let me down. I know you won't. And the green person, give them time. I've got a project to do. Here's some information about it. Can you have a look at that information and come back to me later on to let me know what else you might need in order to complete it, and then let them roll with it. So even how we give information out should be different. And I'm not saying you don't already do this. I'm just highlighting it in such a way because we've been so caught up in our own little worlds, maybe we've forgotten about the people in our teams and how we need to manage them accordingly. How do you recognize them? Well, the red person is going to be in front of everybody else. They're going to happy to share. Who should praise a red person? Everybody should, especially if they're, especially the boss. Who should praise a blue person? I did one seminar once, and this hand goes up at the end, at the back of the room. They said anybody would be nice. Yeah, blue people need appreciation and love and support, because remember, they've done it for somebody else, so therefore they need to get the approval that they've done the right thing for somebody else. But don't do it in front of everybody else, just do it one-to-one, pat on the back. The green person may not need any approval, but we need to feel that we need to thank them. And of course, what they're really grateful for or really proud of is the process they've delivered. So for the green person, that's a really good job, but I'm curious to know how you did it. There is a health warning with a green person, of course. If you give a green person something to do and you ask them how they did it, you may have to block off half a day in your diary in order to hear it. But don't not ask them. Do ask them, but make sure you also give them the time to respond, because otherwise they will miss out. And the people in the middle, the hubs, well, that's quite straightforward. Go down to the pub and have a drink with them because it's all about the team. And of course, at any one time, anybody can be anywhere on here. But I'm pretty certain, as I'm highlighting these different differences, you are very familiar with the people you work with that might fall down one of these areas in order for you to think, you know what, maybe I should just manage them slightly differently. And of course, one of the interesting things about a strength, and of course, each color has its own strengths, are how those strengths can be played out to other people. So a strength like confidence from a red person could come across as arrogant to a blue person. A strength like helpful to a blue person might come across as interfering to a red or green person. And a strength such as analytical from a green person could be nitpicky to a red. My wife's blue green, and I'm, believe it or not, quite high up in the red blue. And I used to give her my work to look at, to see, what do you think of this? And she'd get the red pen out, and I'd say, no, stop. I just need to let me know what you think of it. And she would go, oh, I can't. There's so many mistakes. I go like, oh, stop being so nitpicky. Of course, now I value her analyticalness, not her nitpickiness, and I admire her attention to detail. So the first thing I do when I have anything like that is I give it to her, because fundamentally it's not going to float my boat in the same way she does her. I'm the creativity, she's to make sure the dots are put in the right places. So it's how we work as a team. I always love the example of, if you've got split shifts in the kitchen, how do you get each of the colours to chop the chickens that have turned up late as an order? So the red person, it could be, let's do a box each, let's do it as a race, or it could be, as I said, last week you did it in half an hour, can you beat that? For the blue person, let's take a box each, let's chat, be an opportunity to spend that time together. And for the green person, oh, can you believe they've been let down? We need them done by 4 o'clock. I leave it with you to decide whether you do it now or perhaps just before you come in at 4 o'clock. So you're empowering them to do it. Obviously, people in the middle, you can have a chicken each. So it's around how we think about our teams and how we communicate to them in such a way that enables them to be able to do the job better. Each one's got its own strengths, as I said, and we have to reply and analyze and think about it. Now, of course, from a guest point of view, we're going to have those red guests coming in, and they're going to come in, as I said earlier, they're going to come in and think that they're beyond and better. they're also going to be quite frustrated, and they may not be read, but when they turn up, they might be. So when's my booking? They might be turning out quite blue and altruistic and worried about where they're at and interacting with other people. They may feel that they have they might be very conscientious about regulations, but don't feel like they can say anything. So therefore, you've got to really listen to them to enable them to feel they can speak to you. And obviously, the green people, they will maybe quite happy to sit at the side and by their own time. They will quite possibly highlight to you what if there are any infringements on rules or regulations, or how long they've been sitting there for. I think it's really, really important to stop and think about those guests in that way, in order for you to, I guess, summarize to your teams as well how to best speak to people. Because we take it for granted that they've been doing this all year, but using a tool like this is just a way of enabling them, of identifying the different groups of people. And however you did it, obviously you're not going to have a profile like this perhaps, but however you describe your customers, from your chatty Betty or your analytical Alan, however you want to do it, so that they are constantly aware of differentiating the guest and how you communicate to them, because it is all about relationships. And one of the things I would say is that if you can be interested rather than interesting, you're more likely to get a lot more from the relationships you have. I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of listening to your staff and where they've been, and just watching them and being aware of them, because they are the people who are going to be taking your business forward. It's going to hopefully be really, really busy. Will they know what they're meant to be doing? Have you explained to them what the rules and regulations are, what the processes have been, what you've changed, and how have you got some clarification back? So I guess if we were to summarize the three key areas we've looked at here, it's the reassurance and creating an environment for them to feel safe. So with that, what I mean is that gap between the actual state and the desired state, in order to get the behaviors we want. How can we create the environment for them to feel safe? To recognize, to spend time and to listen to them, so that they feel that they have been respected for the time they've been away. We mentioned last time that you're going to have a whole bunch of people who have resentment over the fact some people have been working. You have resentment for some people who haven't. And some people are going to have other jobs. I'm speaking to a lot of people who work in hospitality, who have found other jobs throughout lockdown. Sometimes they've realized that they didn't like any of them, and they're desperate for hospitality to come back again. Some of them wondering whether or not they actually want to come back to hospitality. And so it's about valuing them as an individual. And I think from a relationship point of view, it's about acknowledging and accepting and adapting to your team's differences. So I said that again. It's about acknowledging that they're different to you. It's about accepting that they're different to you. But more importantly, it's about how you adapt or act on those differences. So to me, re-engaging with your stakeholders is about making sure that you really help them reassure themselves, recognize, and relationships. So three key things today. I hope that's been of value to you. I guess I'm going to bring back Janice now, because there's a strong possibility we're going to have some questions on what's going to happen next, especially with just 2 days looming. So Janice, where are we at?
Now, Tim, I'm trying to come back to you.
I can hear you, I can't see you.
I know, I'm trying to, my webcam is about to share now. There we go. I have returned.
We've got you.
I have returned in my redness, blueness, and greenness. Very, very confusing, to say the least. Thank you. That was very interesting. Just to say, before we take any questions, we have a couple of polls that we'd like people to do. So they will come up now on your screen, and if you could answer them, that would be great. It will help us put together future content, and also streamline any future activity that we might have. Okay, that's the first one, I think, in.
I know one of the questions, Janice, last time was, have you got any ideas we could do with the team? Um, the activity I showed with you there about the desired state and the actual state, I've done that with teams on a regular basis, because to me, they're the teams, or they're the people who are going to come up with the ideas, because you may just not have thought of everything. So that's a
Yeah.
really good activity to do with people.
So if anybody has any questions and they'd like to send them in, that would be great. We'd be happy to answer them. I think that those exercises are quite good. And I also think the relationship between people may change. Sometimes people who are normally read don't cope well with things, and take on a very different role. And I also think that you discover that the relationship between people, quite often people arrive into situations pre-offended, as I describe it. They're already offended because, one, they've been asked to come. Secondly, it's with somebody they don't like. Thirdly, it's a topic they're not comfortable with. So it's really that kind of thing. And I suppose, I think you maybe gave this to as an example of us before, trying to get people to play to their strengths. In a team that's very much about teamwork, sometimes you lose a person's strength. And I suppose I always give the sort of the idea of goalkeeping. So your goalkeeper is unlikely to be a brilliant striker. So if I'm Jurgen Klopp, I'm unlikely to put Mane in goal because he's quite small and goalkeepers tend to be large. So his physical strength is moving quickly, as is Mo Salah's. So therefore, I'm going to go for a Liverpool, a guy who's a big guy who's able to go in there like Alisson, whoever's in goals at the moment. And I'm going to look at him and say, but I will develop his spirit in terms of winning. I don't necessarily want him to score goals. But it's that kind of, and I think that's always a good analogy for us. And I think,
Yeah, I was working in Scotland, and there was a Sharon was a member of the restaurant team who everybody disliked because she did no work. When I say she did no work, she just schmoozed everybody. She went around and entertained the children and chatted to the people, the regulars, but she couldn't be given a section, or she couldn't be trusted on a section. And there was a big debate about whether they should just get rid of her. But they realized they couldn't afford not to. So they actually almost had her as an extra pair of hands who could float. And actually that was her strength. And everybody else, once she was taken off a single responsibility, they used her strengths rather than hating it. And they could give people more, a larger section, allowing her to float and help out. She was no longer interfering, she was helpful. But it's about acknowledging and recognizing those differences, Janice, for sure, for sure.
I think
Square peg round holes, they don't fit.
I think the one thing that we have found is that as customers return in their sentiment, the big things are flexibility, and safety and security. And I suppose it's, how would you recommend you get those sort of flexibility messages out for maybe your reception staff, as well as the safety and security? What tips would you sort of give for people for those?
I think most of that will be around empowerment, which is if you can try and include them in part of the process creation, they're going to know what's going on for a greater degree, Janice. And I think that if you can empower them by, say, making the decisions, but also letting them be their decision makers, because if they've been micromanaged in the past, then they will not feel comfortable and confident to do that. They've perhaps had a year off, they're not going to feel comfortable and confident to do that. So allowing them to believe that they have that empowerment, I think, will be the greatest ability that you can give them. And that's just by giving a bit more freedom and trust in them.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen anybody who has found a really kind of clever way of maybe standardizing it? I think sometimes the brands do a very good standardizing job, but sometimes it's, I suppose, much nicer to have that kind of human, slightly more quirky approach. Have you seen anybody who's done anything that's quite good in terms of that?
Well, from a brand point of view, you have the anything up to £50, or because it's a terrible thing to say. Flexibility often comes with money, and that might be, how can I make your stay even better? So that might be whatever it might be, and often it's unfortunately down to a comp level. But yes, so there might, so if it might be a case, if you put a limit to a member of staff of saying anything over £50 you come find me, under £50 then you can do it yourself. I think it was a Ritz-Carlton gave every customer was given $1,000 that they were allowed to spend. So if a guest turned up, if the guest turned up at the hotel in a taxi and they looked flustered and late, the concierge would just pay for that taxi regardless, so that that guest could then come in and enjoy their stay. You know, that kind of mentality around making sure that you're not throwing money away at them, but what you're doing is you're going, okay, I don't have to go and speak to somebody. I think the best course of action here is this. I'll just do that. And I
I,
think,
I
yeah,
I think the one piece of re-engagement for us that has been quite difficult is we maybe have people, particularly in maybe a family stay, a special occasion, a gift voucher or a wedding, who's maybe arranging for who's maybe arranging things for the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, or eighth time, and they are obviously going to be either in a state of extreme agitation up until the day they arrive, or quite, and especially if they're organizing it for a larger party of people. I mean, how do you think you manage that? Do you manage it before they come, giving them reassurance, or what way would you look at it?
there's two things. One is sharing the journey with the guests. So if you're, let's say, the event manager speaking to them, is you're as you've been upset as they have been. So it's all about rapport building a relationship, because as an event manager, you wanted that event to go ahead, either because you're selfish because you wanted to get another one in to get the booking, or because actually you really like that family. So no matter how, whether you're doing it altruistically or just trying to get the money in, doesn't really matter. You're desperate, and you almost can share that desperation with them because they got that desperation, and it's not hard to be able to match and mirror their state at all in that. You're quite right, Janice. I think that the more you can speak to somebody at the front end and take them on that journey with you, and ask the question of how are you feeling about this, because they'll be happy to share. I'm absolutely certain in most contexts at the moment, people are like desperate to communicate and to share and to have that face to face. So if they are uncertain, then you can go through all the stages in which they're going to feel safer. If they're just desperate to be out there, then you can get that information from them as well. But that qualification exercise around where they're at to take them forward, as you say, Janice, I think you can do it right, now. If they've got an event in a few weeks' time, get in touch with them now. I'm hoping that's already happened. But the more, you almost can't have enough communication with them, because otherwise they will feel lost and they won't know what's happening.
Somebody has asked about bringing staff back for team building. You can bring your staff back to your team, but to your premises at the moment for team building and for training. There are two things you need to be aware of. If they're on furlough, you can still bring them back and train them, and you can give them the information, and that can be paid through furlough. If they come back more than their normal hours, you will have to pay the difference. Or if they incur considerable cost, you will also have to pay the difference. A number of people have done stuff quite cleverly in that they've brought back smaller groups. They've brought back maybe all their managers or all their supervisors or all their housekeeping department or all their kitchen. Some people have done quite a nice thing, and is they've brought their kitchen staff back, and their kitchen staff have cooked dinner or lunch for the other staff and had a look at that. But you can bring them back to your premises, and I would have to say it's one thing that a lot of people have discovered has been invaluable, because as Tim has already outlined, some people may be very excited about coming back, others might be quite nervous. And when they return to the building, their emotion actually changes. And you may not have seen some of them in person for a long period of time. A few people have done it where they've reached out to people in either social media or via their WhatsApp group or via kind of a direct email, asked them to come back, reassure them that it's a smaller group, that it will be socially distanced. If you are doing it, I would recommend that you risk assess it. You have them in a large room, you have planned activity, and then maybe that you go back to them individually afterwards on a one-to-one basis and ask them what they thought, what they were worried about. But we've had a number of people who have done it, and there certainly is a big engagement process to have there. We'll be sharing something at the end of these 3 seminars, which will give people the opportunity to kind of a bit of a tick box to see how they are. That's not to in any way reduce this to a tick box exercise, but sometimes it's nice to have something that you can kind of go down through and say, have you re-engaged with people? Many of you will have done so and done so on a regular basis, but there is an opportunity to go out and maybe readjust that relationship or have a look at it and see how they are. But if anybody has a specific question and they want to send it through to myself, I'd be happy to answer it. But the question is, if you have people who are on furlough, you can bring them back. And I think that is going to be, and I'll ask Tim about this in a minute, That's going to be quite a challenging thing, to bring together really three distinct teams: the teams who've worked, the teams who've been on furlough, and new people. And you've got to join three quite disparate groups of people together. And it's a bit like um, changing from primary school to second level education. There's the people who are in sixth year and they're all cool for school. The people who are in second year who think they're really cool because they were there last year. And then you have the unfortunate first year who's coming in with a uniform that's too big, a blazer that your mother has brought you to see you through from first year to sixth year, and looking stupid. So it's that kind of relationship. So, you know, it's how you really bring those three stakeholders together is quite important. Tim, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you summed it up really nicely, Janice. And I think so. What I've done before with teams is have that open dialogue. I've played some open games regarding where they're at and where they've been, and I think the similarity in the understanding of where people are at means they're happy to share. And if you are open with them and say, you know, you guys must feel you're resentful for these people, and you guys feel, it's kind of like you're opening it up for them. And I think that, you know, they people generally want to get back to some form of normality. And I'm finding it amazing how quickly people are adapting to that. So yes, I think that's a really important piece. And getting those three together, just talking to each other. And that might be splitting up different departments, because I don't know how much departmental breakdown is going to be anymore, because people are going to have to multi-skill so much. But I think that if we can get people to talk to each other about where they feel they've been, and experiences I've done so far, it's happened really easily, really quickly, and people have got back to work really, really quickly. Janice, you mentioned about chefs cooking. You know, the chefs have got to get back to learning how to use the food. I'm hoping that most of the restaurants will be doing a simplified menu, which will either put less pressure on the restaurants, it will put less pressure on the kitchens in regards to how much stuff is being passed around the kitchen, and how much extra work there's going to be. And if you, and I know companies who are cooking it and demonstrating it on social media with their staff. I know people who are cooking it and then giving it to the staff when they're turning up. So all part of that is getting used to the whole menu briefing piece as well. And within all of that, it's everybody's here to move forward. And I think, you know, owners and managers, it's almost a case of, this is where we're at. This is, you know, where you know, understanding where we've been. Any change management pieces around bridging that gap between where we've been and where we're going to be, and that void in the middle of the uncertainty. Be open about that uncertainty and have activities and games such as, you know, just communicating, or even if you just do that thing about the state, it's just highlighting that you're not alone in where you're feeling. And I think, you know, that those simple activities, Janice, are really valuable before you even start talking about SOPs and any regulations that have to be enforced.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you all of you for joining us today. It's been lovely to do this series in conjunction with Tourism Northern Ireland. Tim will talk again tomorrow. If somebody switch on to the next slide, he will be on at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he'll be talking about re-energizing your business and maximizing opportunities. And we look forward to seeing you then. We'd just like to thank TNI for lending us their platform for GoToWebinar. It's been really good. And then next week on Wednesday, we have a session about sales and marketing, looking at the summer staycation. But Tim will be back tomorrow. For those of you who know me, you know that I love alliteration. So Tim Talks tomorrow is really good for me. And thank you, Tim. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everybody. And I hope that you find this afternoon session of use. Thank you.